Okay, it is time for our final implementation plan in this volume. This is the implementation plan for Canon 3. Now, we have seen the Canon done over and over. We have seen 2 different implementation plans, and we know they take a while to get through. Now, remember, when we constructed Canon 2, we did it in such a way that it was going to be very close to the way Canon 3 needed to be designed. Remember, it served as a stepping stone to the XNA game Canon. Now, our implementation plan here is going to basically be based off of the Canon 2 implementation plan. What does that mean? That means I'm going to bring up the implementation plan for Canon 2 and just simply make a few changes to it. So for the most part, we're going to be following the implementation plan for Canon 2. Now let's go ahead and jump over here to the whiteboard and start out with our game item class. Now guess what? The game item class is going to look just like the game item class over in Canon 2 with a couple small changes. We're still going to start out with 3 private data members. Let me grab my pen. This time I've got it set in red so that we can just kind of walk through things and see the difference. Position, velocity, and texture, but this time around, instead of our texture being a picture box, our texture, hang on, let me go ahead and just kind of clear this out a little bit, is going to be a texture 2D. So it is a different kind of object. Remember, the texture 2D is going to allow us to hold our bitmap data inside this object. Now, moving on down from there to our public properties, we're going to have our position, we're going to have our velocity, our texture, of course, and our origin. All of this is going to look exactly the way it did in Canon 2. Moving down from there, we're going to have update. Again, it's going to look absolutely the same. Draw is going to be changed. Why is draw going to be changed? Well, remember, working with our 2D textures over here in the XNA framework, we're going to be drawing using the sprite batch. So obviously we need to change our draw method to use sprite batch for drawing out our textures. Okay? So that is it for game item. So for the most part, it's going to look identical to Canon 2's game item. All right, next thing. Let us come back over here and look at the engine. All right, a few changes here. The first is simply going to be, well, let me go ahead and give myself something to write on. There we go. Remember when we created all the picture boxes? We don't need to do picture boxes no more. All this stuff here is going to simply be gone. So we had some update timers. All that is going to be gone. So this whole section right here no longer works. Instead, what do we need to do? Well, remember back in the simple XNA game or simple XNA application that we did in the last video, we had to import a resource, an asset, right? Well, we need to do that here. So basically, once we create our project, we're going to go and take care of our graphical assets. So we'll make the folder in the project, and we'll go ahead and put all of our PNG files in there and get them set up as assets so that we can access them that way. So what I can do is just come over here and quickly erase this out now that we have an idea of what's taken place. I guess I could have used a bigger eraser, but this will work. And then we will say so get our graphical assets brought in and set up. Okay, from there what we're going to do is copy all of our variables, the same variables that we used before. Absolutely the same. Screen width, screen height, projectile speed, base target speed, collision distance, starting lives, game difficulty control, lives display, or excuse me, lives title width, is game running, lives, level, and random. We'll bring all of that over, but we're going to add one new one this time around. Of course, we need to have that sprite batch variable, so we'll be adding all of our old variables plus sprite batch. Okay, from there, we're going to skeleton in only one method this time. Remember last time we had skeleton in initialize, load graphics content, update scene, draw scene. That's not needed. Remember, the XNA framework is going to provide for us automatically in the template that we get when we create a new Windows game, initialize, load graphics content, update and draw. So the only thing we're going to need this time around is to skeleton in the update player method. From there, let's go ahead and look up here. What we were doing before was setting our client size. Well, same exact thing, except this time around, instead of in the initializer, it's going to be done in the constructor. And the way we're going to set our client size, the same way we did in our simple XNA application in the last video, was our preferred back buffer, width and height. Remember that? So preferred back buffer, width and height. Like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay. I'm just not going to write all that stuff out. All right, from there, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create our sprite batch and our random object. That means where we had set up the call for the load to, a call to the load graphics content from our form load, we don't need that anymore. The call to update and draw scene from our timers, we don't need that anymore. All of that is automatically connected up for us. So instead, what we need to do is simply come down here and create our random object, and we are going to also create our sprite batch. And we'll do both of these creations in initialize. Alright, from there we're going to go ahead and set up the sprite batch .begin and end over in draw, so that will be something new so that we can handle drawing out our player. So we'll just go ahead and say set up sprite batch and we'll just say begin and end in draw. So in the provided draw method. Alright, from there it is time to go ahead and turn our attention back over to our player. So just as before, our player variable, all of this stuff is still going to apply. Just as soon as I can find, there we go, where my pen went. So here we go, we'll set up the player variable, we'll go ahead and initialize. Now we need to load the player asset into the the texture. So get the player asset texture loaded into the texture 2D object. Okay, whew, that's a mouthful. So instead of taking care of a picture box, we'll simply be taking care of a texture object. So I'm just going to write texture loading. Alright, once we have that done, next thing we had before was a link to picture box. No, that's not needed anymore. But we do need to call the update player from update. Okay, so it's not update scene anymore, so we can go ahead and take care of that. So call update player, so that's still good. And then call player.draw, so just like we had before, we've got draw, that's player.draw right there. Just I was writing my version of shorthand in that particular video. So we'll call draw from inside of draw, not draw scene. So once again, this is the provided draw in our Windows game. And then from there, we'll go ahead and finish off the engine by coding in our update player method. And at this point, we'll actually have our little player moving back and forth. So that will be good. And that'll also show us our engine running nice and smoothly. So let's go ahead and move over to the mechanics section. Inside the mechanics section, we're going to skeleton in a bunch of methods just like we did before. Let's go ahead and adjust our layer right there. So we'll go ahead and come in here and do our mechanic methods, which is check fire, reset target, reset projectile. We'll do our collision methods, which are going to be our check ground collision and check air collision. We're going to do our utility method, which is going to be distance. Logan, at this point, you feeling up to going back over to Canon 2 and just grabbing a lot of this code?
That would probably be a really good idea. With the codes, or the code being so similar between these two, it would make a lot of sense to reuse a lot of that code, since it should be only minor tweaks that we'd have to do to make the code work in this new Canon game.
I agree. So we will just steal a lot of this stuff right here, okay, from over in Canon 2. All right, so from there, we'll just go ahead and bring our attention down, just like we did when we created Canon 2, to the target item. We'll initialize, set up the texture, and then call update and draw, or make sure we take care of the appropriate updating and drawing for the target item. We'll get our reset target, our check ground collision, all of that stuff working so that basically the target is in place. We'll then turn our attention over to
the projectile item and do the exact same thing here with initializing it, loading the texture, updating, drawing, and then we'll make sure check fire is working right, check air collisions are working, and make sure that distance, once again, has been borrowed over from Canon 2. And at this point, we'll have all of our mechanics in place. Now remember, in Canon 2, when I showed you that basically our projectile, I just used that as an example over here, our projectile, well, it was a game item, and the game item was referencing, if you will, was linked up with a picture box. Well, this relationship is still pretty much the same, except instead of it being a picture box that we are associated with, it is simply going to be a texture 2D that we're going to be associated with. So let me go ahead and just jot that in here. So the same kind of setup here applies. Alright, so with that out of the way, then we get to move on to part 3. So part 3 is going to have, it's going to be our gameplay logic. This one's going to be real easy. So we're going to come in here and remove our temp reset target. We're going to be stealing a bunch of code once again from over in Canon 2, our begin game, our end game, our kill player, our kill target. And I think we're going to go ahead and expand that and grab update life's display as well. So I can go ahead and just come over here and add okay, yeah, that's update life's display. Just trust me. Now, there's no reason for us not to grab it. At this point, Canon 2 and Canon 3 are so similar, and we're just going to make life a little bit easier for ourselves. Then instead of having to go through and comment out a bunch of different lines like we had to do in Canon 2 when we had borrowed code from Canon 1, this time around all we need to do is comment out our life's display line. So let's just go ahead and come in here. We're just commenting out one thing basically. So life's display line in our update life's display. We'll simply comment that out. So only one thing, and you'll see when we get there. From there, we need to remove. So this is something that's going to be new. We're going to need to remove all references to title screen picture box. So remove references to picture box, because we're not using any picture boxes in this XNA version of Canon. Alright, from there, everything else is going to follow out the same. So we'll go ahead and add game starting check and update scene. From there, or in this case, not update scene, but we can go ahead and scratch that out. It's just into update. And then we've got call our kill player from check ground collision, and finally we've got call kill target from check air collision. So all the rest of it's going to be the same. Very, very similar. This is only minor changes. Trust me, you're going to really feel that when we start coding this, because it's going to go a whole lot faster since so much of it is complete in Canon 2. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is turn our attention over to the HUD class. So let's go ahead and bring up our next slide. So the HUD class, once again, everything is going to remain the same with the exception of draw. So we're still going to have our position, our texture, our width, and our height private data members, with the exception of texture being a picture box. Instead, it is going to be a texture 2D. From there, we're going to have some public properties. So position, texture, width, and height. And then draw is going to be different. We need to change draw to account for the sprite batch, because it's the sprite batch that's going to handle the drawing of our textures. Okay? So with that being the only thing that has changed, we then can go ahead and get it into play. So let's come over here to our last slide, which all we need to do now is create our title screen, create our lives display, and get display lives from, well, Canon 2. and rename, all that good stuff. You get the idea. Actually, there's just a tad bit more. I'm just summarizing. I mean, we got to do the create lives display, initialize, set up dimensions, all that good stuff again. But same exact thing that we did before when we wrapped up Canon 2.
Right. The only real difference here is the fact that we have update lives display. We just need to uncomment that line that was commented before.
Precisely. So this may seem a little bit confusing. If you were in our shoes, it wouldn't be confusing only because, well, we've now done this twice, so we're looking at the same old implementation plan, and we're very familiar with the code now. So Logan and I just went through the old implementation plan that we had printed out and scratched out stuff here, there, and just made some new notes, and that's exactly what I've done here for you guys. So now it's time for us just to code this. And again, most of it is going to be very, very familiar to you because we're going to borrow most of it from Canon 2. No reason to rewrite the code. So with that, that's going to wrap up our implementation plan. And let's go ahead and turn our attention to coding Canon 3 in XNA.